Martin is a retired high school music teacher from Kitchener who now finds himself with a bit more time to pursue his many interests, including baseball history. While his presentation on the 2022 World Series champion Toronto Blue Jays will have to be rescheduled, he appreciates the opportunity to present to us today another championship team from North America.
Thank you, Andrew. Great. It's so nice to be in person again, not by mute buttons and cameras and make sure things are working. We'll continue. Thanks for your efforts, Andrew. Nice to see familiar faces. And yes, my interests typically are more 19th century, but I came across this team and had lots of questions when I found out about how they went from worst to first, or Pire premier, and had questions about how did they do that, and as I dug in, I was intrigued by some of the things. Some of you may know some of the answers, so please act surprised. But hopefully, as I get into more detail, and it'll go pretty quickly, so hopefully you had your caffeine to keep up. Hopefully you'll learn some things, and as I did as I went through, to find out about this Quebec team in the Can-Am League. There's the synopsis that's in your paper, and to summarize it, I wanted to find out how did they go from worst to first. Are there any lessons to be learned? Not some big lessons, unless you want to consider what is the role of a minor league team or league. Is it to serve the major league affiliate that they're tied to? Is it to serve the community or the fans? I'll leave that for you to debate in the break, but you'll see that kind of pops up. Why is it that after 2 seasons of great success, they left the league? Find out that, and then who are some of the people involved in making that story happen. So a quick story of the Can-Am League, for those who may or may not know, is Class C League, also known as the Canada. Started in 1936 with 6 teams, half of which were Canadian, so truly a Canadian-American league. Perth winning the trophy that first year. And then they gained stability for the next several seasons with 8 teams in each of the following years. The Canadian membership varied. It started off pretty solid, and then it kind of waned a bit, and then to the point where 1940 you had half of a team being Canadian, as Ottawa shared home games with Augsburg, New York. Ottawa ended up leaving in 1940, at the end of 1940, but thankfully were replaced by 2 teams who came from the provincial league. I won't say much more about that because that's going to be talked about a little more later. But the 2 teams were Quebec and Trois-Rivières, the Athletics from Quebec, and the Renards, the Foxes from Trois-Rivières, for those 2 seasons. And as we've already had a great presentation on the war, we do of course have the impact. Okay, so reps didn't translate that. It's supposed to be a helmet to indicate that World War II obviously had a huge impact on many leagues and teams, and we did not operate during those 3 seasons. But once they resumed in 1946, tremendous amount of stability, surprisingly, until 1950, as the same 8 teams remained as part of the Can-Am League. Trois-Rivières actually won the trophy in 1946, and here is a map showing the location of the 8 teams. Is there a laser pointer per chance? No. I'll just point. You see the 6 New York teams are obviously quite close to each other, and the 2 Quebec teams way up there, that does have a part to play later in our story. And just a comparison quickly about population, you can see that Quebec, of all the 8 teams, had the largest population at around that time. I double-checked, Pittsfield does look correct by what I find of Quebec, the notable leader in terms of population, which of course provided a great fan base for the team. So, 1948 is where our story begins, and the teams in order of standings at the end of the season. We have the Rome Colonels, who finished first, followed by at this point they changed their name to Les Royaux, or the 3 Rivers Royals, supposed to be about 92nd, followed by the Oneonta Red Sox. Pittsfield Electrics came in 4th place. The Schenectady Blue Jays were 5th, followed by the Gloversville Johnstown Glovers. I don't know how they fit that in their jerseys, but that was the number 16. The Amsterdam Rug Makers, great nickname, were number 7. And sadly, Les Alouettes, at this point, the Quebec team finished in last place for the 3rd year running, by the way. So, things changed in 1949. One of the main spoiler alerts here, by the way, before I get there. Strange playoff format where they had the first and third teams playing off against each other for the first, or one of the semifinals, the second and fourth teams, and results of the Red Sox won the trophy in 1948. Now, 1949, you already know what happens. Well, what happens is some teams remain in the same positions and there's some switches. Both Pittsfield and Gloversville remained in those particular positions, but you had Oneonta and Three Rivers, so 20 switching positions. You also had Amsterdam and Schenectady switching positions, but the most dramatic change, good for Quebec, not so good for Rome, who ended up switching positions. Rome finishing 41 games behind Quebec. Now, one could theorize that maybe the reason why Quebec went all the way up to first was because they changed their names yet again. They changed their names to Les Braves, the Quebec Braves, perhaps, but there are some other definitely more important changes that took place that would contribute to that dramatic change in 1949. So that's what we'll take a look at. How did they go from worst to first? A lot of it had to do with this gentleman, the team owner or president, Marie-Ulysse Saint-Marie, who was kind of tired of finishing last place, go figure. So he decided, I had this ambition, I want to make a winning team. And so several things happened at his behest, other things just happened because of that. So quickly, some of the things that I'll look at in more detail is the fact that they changed their status to being independent, which allowed for many, many roster moves. The management also changed on the field. These changes affected the age of the players. Is that plus or minus? We'll find out because that ties into the experience of those players. And then the stability of the roster itself overall and the strength of the lineup. All of these contributed to this #1 team in 1949. So let's take a look at the first part. In 1948, Les Alouettes were actually an affiliate of the New York Giants. But it was decided that they wouldn't attach themselves to a major league club. They decided to go independent. And this provided a tremendous amount of flexibility, no limitations put upon them by the major league club to do what they wanted, what the owner wanted in terms of forming his team or reforming, rebuilding. And he decided, as is indicated in this article, that he wanted to find, as probably all owners would like to do, to find great players, run producers, des gros canons. Maybe you can indicate, is that hitters or fielders? Because I wasn't entirely sure if it'd be great throwing arms, cannons, or great hitters. I presume both.
I would say hitters.
I would say that as well, and also pitchers of experience. Obviously, we wanted to get great players. Who wouldn't? But he had the flexibility to do so, which, of course, was not. At the bottom, it just indicates that this was not common practice, as most teams would be affiliated with a major league club, and as a result, had certain responsibilities to that club. The Braves did not. This allowed for many roster moves. Many. I'll only highlight two of them. The first one was when they acquired Vernon Moose Shetler, a colossus of 6'3" and 195 pounds. Pre-steroids, of course. Because now, if you look at Judge's statistics, height and weight, but seen as a great run producer, long-distance hitter, and someone who they felt would make people forget about Lewandowski, who was no slouch as the first baseman in 1948. But Shetler was hoped to be a great improvement at that position as a hitter. Another acquisition was Louis Parmigiano, who was the petit poisson, the little fish. You'll notice the heading there. I don't know if that's an intentional typo, because poison means a different thing, but maybe it was seen as a threat to the rest of Canada. But he was acquired, and he was a very different kind of player, a very versatile player, someone who was seen as someone who could pitch it, play in the outfield regularly, and could even come in and pitch. So very versatile. There were so many roster moves from 48 to 49 that only 3 players from the 48 team actually remained on the club in 49. And of those 3, you'll see that 2 of them didn't even spend much of their time on the 49 clubs. So a huge turnover in the team roster. The only individual that really was a member of both squads for full seasons was one of the pitchers, Polinsky. We'll take a look at him soon. There was, on the field, management seemed to be a necessary change as Frank McCormick, perhaps is a name familiar to some of you, a great major league player, was brought in because Tony Ravish was let go after 2 seasons. They had finished last 3 seasons in a row. Ravish was the manager the last 2 seasons. It was time to change that up. And so McCormick was brought in, not only in the hopes that his major league experience would translate to great managerial moves on the field, such as it was in those days, but also as still a viable hitter, but hopefully be someone who could be one of the best hitters in the Canada. Didn't turn out that way, but as a manager, he certainly led a team to great success. Again, just a quick comparison between the two. There's Ravish and McCormick, and you can see there how does this guarantee a good manager make? Not necessarily, but a tremendous amount of major league experience that McCormick brought to the Braves in 1949. All the roster moves changed the demographic of the team tremendously. As you see here, that the age of the batters was now quite a bit higher. The pitchers themselves went from about 22 years to 3 years older or so. And as far as veteran players, there are quite a few more veteran players on the 1949 squad. Does this mean it's going to be a better team? Maybe, maybe not, but when it comes to the experience, then that is where you see the benefits. Because I wondered, well, what kind of players were these people who were brought in 1949? So I looked at, the minor league and major league, in some cases, careers of the players. What was the highest level they attained? When you look at the 1948 squad, you can see that over half of the team were Class C level players, which means they hadn't attained a level much higher than that. So that was fair for them to be on that team, but hadn't achieved much higher levels of success. When you compare that to 1949, however, you can see that 70% of the squad had either beforehand or after, in most cases beforehand, had played at much higher levels, including up to the major leagues. So they brought with them a tremendous amount of playing experience and playing ability, or pitching ability as well. So there already you see a different demographic on the 1949 team. No big surprise considering where we ended up. As far as the stability, we know, especially these days, more for injuries than anything, but also in terms of trying to find, the right mix of players. It generally is a good indication if you can keep, a smaller pitching staff consistent throughout the year. When there's a lot of changes, that's usually a case that you're trying different things. And as you compare 1949 and 49, the number of players who appeared in at least one game on each squad, 1949, they had 24 players played on the team as opposed to 48, where 49 players ended up being tried, and in many cases didn't last very, very long. The pitching staff went from 24 players who were tried out as pitchers in 48 to only 10 were needed in 1949. Great success were found with many of those players. And just a quick, many of those players and pitchers were tried for 1 or 2 games and then seen as not a good fit, or perhaps the players themselves were brought in at the last minute. But 14 of those pitchers from 1948 were one-offs or two-offs, that's a word, whereas 1949 much less. As far as regular pitchers, though, not a huge difference on paper, but if you think of the Jays this year, if only were you and Kikuchi, 2 more pitchers could have, provided us with the seasons that we were hoping for, that would have perhaps, could have, but difference there. And as far as the players themselves, again, regular players, not a huge difference, but 3 more players who played more regularly, greater stability, and perhaps more success. There were quite a few players who played less than 10 games, quite a lot, as you can see. But I do want to pay a little attention to the fact that there were perhaps 4 players who were quasi-local. 2 players, Gilbert Gaudin and Henri Labrec, were Quebecois in 1948. Not sure about Guy Poirier, because it's such a common name, it's tough to find out which one, so he probably was a local Quebecer, brought in, unfortunately, for only 1 game. But Jacques Poulin did have French-Canadian ancestry, though he came from Maine. So there were a few local players in 1948. Unfortunately, 1949 squad, there were no Quebecers on the team, but they still represented, of course, the city to great success. And now, we look at a comparison, and I'm going to bust this pretty quickly. This is not an intense sabermetric analytic comparison. It's just looking at basically the slash lines to see where were the improvements made. Were they all across the board? So I've made the decisions of where the improvements were or maybe not. So for instance, starting out at first base, did Shetler make people forget about Lewandowski? Lewandowski, you can see, led the team in batting average and in RBIs, but Shetler led the league in RBIs, so definitely an improvement at the first base position there. At second base, not really. In fact, if anything, really kind of regressed a little bit, so not a huge change there. With Joe Kaczynski as the regular second baseman in 1949. At shortstop, Joe Hamel, who really wasn't much of an improvement either. So far, Bill Sinram, when you look at his batting average, quite a bit lower, but I put in his fielding average to show that he, all in all, probably about, an equal kind of comparison. So far, after the infield, there's not a noticeable improvement in the squad. But this was an infomercial, I would say, but wait, there's more, and so let's look at the outfield, where we had Harold Schott was the one of the outfielders in 48, but Garland Butch Line was one of the outfielders who, despite incredible stats, didn't really lead the team in any of those, but his overall production garnered him MVP for the league, so definitely an improvement there. Louis Palmasiano, the Poisson, was a solid outfielder, not a tremendous improvement, so kind of a tie there. But third outfielder Pete Elko led the league in batting average and was another solid outfielder, so an improvement there. So you can see the outfield was greatly improved. At the catching position, Charles Alcott was a little bit of an improvement over Ben Haddix. So as far as the sort of starting nine, good improvements there. It's not until you get to the pitching rotation that you see some big improvements. In order of games started, Belinsky was the sort of number one starter at 48. When compared to Alex Danilishyn, the win-loss record is kind of understandable because, of course, with little offensive support in 1948, it makes sense that Belinsky was not likely to win as many games. Gosman knows how he feels. But Danilishyn, his stats do compare otherwise to Belinsky, so at the first position, I guess, about comparable. But then when you look at the second pitcher, Hal Erickson, he led the league in wins and in whip, and so was an improvement over a quite solid pitcher in Bud Younger. And then Johnny Mansfield, also an improvement over Joe Galeotto. And then Belinsky was actually essentially the number 4 starter in 1949, was also an improvement over Patterson. The number 5 starter wasn't employed as much in those days, so but just for completion, I've put the 2 number 5 starters, and they're about equal. So, but you can see a definite improvement in the pitching rotation that St. Marie brought in. And when you look overall at the team stats, in terms of wins, in terms of batting average, home runs, in almost every statistical category, they improved. Okay, no big surprise with the players they brought in. The only one they didn't improve upon was stolen bases, which kind of makes sense considering the increased age of the team. But not a big difference there, but it's still a well-rounded team in terms of hitting, pitching, and fielding. Again, no surprise that they would be that way. Quick highlights of the season. How did they get from worst to first in 1949? They start off the season with a solid win over Gloversville. Hal Erickson allowed 6 singles and a solo home run to defeat them 4-1, and they were off to the races by the end of May. They were already in first place, 2 games over the Rug Makers. And then the month of June is when the pitching staff really shone because no less than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, wait, there's more. 7 shutouts in the month of June. Starting off with a 1-hit shutout. On the far right column is how many hits the pitchers allowed. Erickson started off the month, early in the month, with a 1-hit shutout. and finished the month with 3 hit shutouts, so 7 shutouts just in 1 month, which certainly didn't hurt their record as they remain in first place, in this case over Oneonta, at the end of June. Move forward to July, start off the month with the first of 3 walk-off wins, finishing the month with an amazing record of 24-8. So they padded their lead, as you can see here, as we could see there we go, 7 games now in the lead. End of August, they had a much larger lead, as you can see over on Oneonta, to the degree that they were considered and called as the champions of the Canada by the end of August. They finished their season on September 11th of the regular season with a loss to Pittsfield, but the final standings are there. Totally no slouch in 3rd position, but Quebec very clearly the leaders. Now we get to the playoffs, where they were facing their province mates. And between Reign and Trois-Rivières, they persevered and swept them in 4 games with some good hitting performances by Vern Shetler and 4 solid pitching performances. Then they went on to the finals versus the Red Sox. And again, after 1 rain out, they very solidly, with 4 solid pitching performances by their 4 starters. And again, Shetler being the star, the walk-off there, they swept the Red Sox 4 games to nothing. So they really cleaned house in the playoffs to win the trophy, the Ford Trophy as it's called. So that's 49. So great, okay, it's a great team. So what now? The hope was to improve upon that, and surprisingly, there was a change in ownership as a physician who was an enthusiastic supporter of the Braves ended up buying the team owner. And well, I'm sure he looked at that and said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So in order to try to continue this trend into 1950, he basically didn't tinker too much with the roster, although there was a change in management, as it turned out. So I mentioned before how from 48 to 49, there were only 3 players who stayed on the team, but from 49 to 50, 14 players ended up remaining on the team. There, including most of their pitching staff. And the +1 that you can see in the top right was actually, if you remember Bud Younger from before, solid pitcher back in 1948, a very popular player. They brought him back, and he was added to the pitching staff in 1950, added to an already solid pitching staff. I should note, actually, that on the 1950 squad, there were also 2 players, Robert Adamson and Walden Williams, who were 2 Negro players, 2 black players. This is, of course, 4 years removed from the Montreal Royals with Dr. Robinson. There was also another interesting player, Jean-Louis Leclerc, who caught for 2 games, but he decided he'd pursue his hockey career and did spend several seasons in the NHL with the Canadiens. So a few eclectic players in 50, but by and large, it's basically 1949 squad, who were led not by Frank McCormick, who just moved on, but replaced with George McQuinn. I was fascinated by how they compare. Just very quickly, you can see their careers very similar. The number of games in the majors they played, almost identical. Their success on the field, very similar. Both first basemen, both all-stars, both either MVPs or up for MVP consideration. About the same power stats, amazingly similar. So I guess that was seen as a very comparable replacement on the field that wouldn't disrupt things, and ended up being that case. Some quick highlights there, highlighted by perhaps Bud Younger's no-hitter on August 4th. They had a very successful season, improving upon the 1949 season. In fact, their record of 97-40 caused them to be listed amongst the top 100 minor league teams that Bill Weiss and Marshall Wright put together, one of the better records among that list. Sorry for 20, yes, they finished 50.5 games in behind. But Quebec went on, and in the semifinals, almost a sweep, and the finals, it was a sweep over the Rugmakers, so they again won the trophy for 2 years in a row. So what now? Well, I was intrigued by why things changed. Because, well, the initial plan, as of even late October 1950, was that Canada would continue with the same 8 clubs, including Toilet and Quebec. And as it says over there, the Canadiens, they were not ready to go to the Provincial League. If you recall, they had come, Quebec and Toilet, from the Provincial League about 10 years prior. And there was some speculation, but here they're indicating that, no, we're good. But, now, just for comparison, attendance, they were a popular team. They certainly, by their success and by the population of Quebec, brought in many fans, so there was no issue there, no concern there. So, great on the field success with 2 years, 2 trophies, and then great attendance. All things are good. But there was some speculation that a couple of teams might end up leaving the Can-Am League, so there was a little bit of uncertainty there. There was, as is I'm sure still today, issues with policies between Canada and the U.S. and politics that were causing a few ruffles. From the map, you may remember from before, quite a large distance to travel, the costs were borne by that, so that was a consideration as well. And just the idea that of rejoining, even though the players themselves weren't Quebecois, the management and the community, of course, the fans were, so there was this respect for the Provincial League and a little bit of a pull that did draw them back as they did leave the Canadian American League and were readmitted to the Provincial League for 1951. What did that do to the Can-Am League very quickly? You can see again the stability that they enjoyed for 5 seasons. 1951, Schenectady did end up leaving, replaced by the Kingston Colonials. You'll notice no Canadian teams in the Canadian American League in 1951. There was some debate as to whether they should change the name, but they didn't. They didn't really have time because, unfortunately, and this is a common tale, the league ceased operations at the end of that season. Common tale reflected in another league that had some Canadian teams. They didn't even survive the 1951 season. And many of you probably know some of the reasons for that. Those 3, so the military draft that took place, and then TV and radio as games were being broadcast there. There was less interest in having to go out to the park, or not stadium, but to the park to go see the games. So attendance started to wane, especially with Quebec having left, being such a big draw. As the postscript, what happened to the Quebec team in 1951? Well, first of all, it was decided that they would re-affiliate with the Major League club, the Boston Braves, as it turned out. That changed their demographic tremendously. Remember how the 1950-1949 squad was a few years older, more experienced, more veteran. This now went backwards in 1951. Very, very young team. Maybe youth is a great thing. It was not. They finished in 4th place. The only team to be affiliated with a Major League squad in 1951. And just a little interesting side note, the Boston Braves themselves, they moved on after before 52 to Milwaukee. And 2 players of note on 52 Boston Braves, Mr. Warren Spahn, but then also for us Canadian baseball fans, the second baseman, 25 years later, was of course the first manager of the Blue Jays. He was on that team. And as far as Quebec and the Provincial League, what happened after that? Well, time's run out. There's good news and bad news. Let's leave it at that. And that is the story of how Quebec rose. They didn't fall, but they did have great success from worst to first. That is the Quebec story. Thank you.
I expect the source of all the data is box scores in the paper.
I spent a lot of time.
Because you showed the comparison by position of the offensive contributions, but the one thing you can't glean from that, of course, is defensive contributions. But in the box scores, wouldn't you be able to perhaps total up errors from one year to the next and see if there's a big difference in improvement there?
I did look up the year-end stats. Again, that could be a whole other big deep dive. That's why in one case I put the fielding percentage because I realized there was a change. In the other cases, there wasn't huge changes that stuck out. at me as far as, oh, this is definitely a much better fielder. So
And
it was a
it's-
very cursory
I
statistic.
mean, it's just too bad because it's just not available. Or perhaps for the positions where the players are pretty equal, the one guy was actually way better defensively.
Well, the stats are available. I mean, so the year-end stats and the box scores as well. So I did look at those. The only one that did stick out was the third baseman, if I recall, that had quite a bit better fielding percentage. Otherwise, I looked just at the offensive. I did look at the fielding, but there were huge differences that were available.
You focused on the managers in 49 and 15, the difference in the quality of the managers. Can you tell us anything about the owner of the team, Samari? Was that,
Yeah, it was
what
hard.
motivated him? An idea of what motivated him in 1950 to do what he did?
Well, he was there in 1949, or from, I forget where he started, but he was there from 48 to 49, so he was part of the transition. Bellemare was a physician who took over in 1950. What motivated Saint-Marie to...
Yeah, I'm sorry, I had
That's
the
okay.
years wrong. What,
Yeah.
what motivated Samari in 49 to put this great team together?
I could not find why, if it was just his decision to go independent, and as a result, then he didn't have those limitations. So, and I consulted a little bit to try to find out what's sort of the story. That was a whole other sort of, rabbit's nest, a rabbit's hole of trying to find out, what were minor league, what was the function of minor leagues at those times. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, because they weren't tied to a major league club, they had a lot of freedom to be able to sign whoever they wanted, whoever he wanted, which he obviously did. He just wanted to have a good club. 3 years running, they were in last place. So now we're not tied to a major league club. We'll just sign who we want, and here are some good names that I've heard about. So he basically did that.
How long did, I should remember this, but how long did McQuinn stay as manager?
He stayed, that was part of the next story. He stayed on for about 4 or 5 more seasons. In fact.
Because he's on the cover of La Revue dans cette année
Oh, okay.
program.
Yeah. There was a lot of good news
1954,
there that happened after the 51 season.
And the other thing is, I've looked a lot, I guess, before that, with Emile Dion and his efforts to, in the 30s and 40s, to get an affiliation with major league teams. Did he have any involvement post-war? I sort of haven't looked.
His name didn't pop up
Yeah.
much that I saw. No.
Yeah.
I didn't see his name.
Because he was a journalist too. He was president of the Can-Am League pre-World War II.
Yeah, the name, I remember the name a little bit, but it didn't,
Yeah.
I spent so much
He's
time.
not
before
in
the-
this, it's another squirrel when we got in another
Yeah,
direction.
yeah, I tried to condense that into a reasonable amount of time, and so, yes.
You mentioned starting in 1951 that Quebec in the provincial league was affiliated with the Braves. If you look at the major league box scores, there were 4 Quebecois players of note who reached the major leagues of that generation. All pitchers, all developed in the Braves farm system. Did other teams just not have scouting in Quebec, or were the Braves successful where other teams weren't?
Don't know that. I didn't look into the 51. I left the provincial league for Christian. You might be able to answer that better.
Well, Alain Gazou was one of the scouts for the Braves that signed up a bunch of these players, so he's, I would say, partly responsible for that. So he probably was one of the few in Quebec that was scouting heavily.
Thank you.
I noticed that they were called the Braves before affiliation with the Braves.
Yeah,
And the uniform looked identical to the Boston Braves uniforms.
yeah, coincidence? I don't know.
Is that just hopeful?
I'm sure Boston probably looked at that and said, well, listen, we have marketing already in place there. I'm speculating there, but yeah, I think it's more than coincidence, but good point.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because the relationship seems a bit unclear. I mean, it seems like before even 50, maybe they had some sort of working agreement with the Braves, and McCormick was coming from the Brave organization, I guess. So
They might have had some unofficial tie, for sure.
Right.
It was tough, it wasn't, I couldn't find, I searched and tried to find some more tie-ins and couldn't find a whole lot. But it is very possible that there was maybe some things that weren't reported in the press.
It's interesting, because Bob Quinn with Boston, there's a rejection letter. Emile Dion wrote pretty well everybody tried to get affiliations with the major league team. So it's interesting, you know, in 1951, it did tie into Boston, but there's a great rejection letter from Bob Quinn, which basically tells him, you're too far away, and we don't want your players, and yeah, all that stuff. So
Did you see if the move to veteran players is also a bit because of a push from the provincial league? Because the 49 is a great year in the provincial league with all of the major leaguers and Drummondville and all that. Is it, I mean, where do you feel like they could not compete with just, I mean, in terms of attendance and all that, and attention from if they were filling a bunch of young guys, and that they needed to have like more veteran teams to keep their, I don't know, momentum in the province or something like that?
So 49 and 50, you mean?
I mean, in
when
49, I mean,
Yep.
the provincial league was creating
Yeah.
in the spotlight, I mean, across North America, I guess, with Max here and South Korea and all that. So were they, do you think that there was a bit of a pressure that they needed to have bigger names to keep their fans or things like that? Or?
They had really good attendance even before that. Even 48, they had good attendance. But it's very possible I didn't look into the provincial league at those times because I have a life. But it's very possible but they still had really good attendance, and then it just continued to improve into the following years. So again, a lot of that may have been reported, may not have been. I didn't see anything that stuck out at me.
Do we know those numbers, Mark? Really good attendance. How many folks are they drawing?
Sorry?
How many people are they drawing to their games?
They were drawing between about home games between about 2,500 to up to, they had a couple of games where there were 5,000 or so. In a stadium that could hold substantially more, Lansdowne, I think it was. So they could have quite a bit more, but they still grew quite a bit and easily outshone the other teams in terms of attendance, about 126,000 or so at the end of the season. So they did okay that way. As is with other
you
ways.
just mentioned about the travel costs and all that. Other leagues which have those same difficulties, I've run across articles where there's great debates about how much we share, and do we have to pay more than sort of 50-50, or how it is splitting the game receipts. Did much of that surface in the papers, or?
I saw a little bit of that was one of the issues that happened when sort of after October 1950, when there was a should we stay or should we go?
Yeah.
There was, because initially there was an agreement. Initially, the provincial league, I believe it was, had an agreement made with the team, or sorry, tried to make them agree to a certain condition in terms of the cost, and they said no, that's not acceptable. It took quite a bit of negotiating for the Quebec team to finally say, okay, we're good to come in, because it was tied to all of that, the travel costs and the amount of compensation. So there was discussion of that.
Just the other point, your PowerPoint skills are putting all the rest of us to shame. So you should have been the last presentation, so we wouldn't feel embarrassed when we do
Yeah,
ours.
probably a good idea is to take the video and watch it at 3/4 speed, so you can get more of the details. But yeah, I tried to squeeze as much. I took out a lot because there was just so much, and it was kind of neat to find out how did they go. I don't know if there's any lessons for any folks today. Don't know, but that's not
Actually, that's why he was scheduled early in the morning.
Yeah.
I knew about those skills.
Yeah, that's
Anyway,
amazing.
thank you.
Thank you.